Good evening. I'd like to call the Lincoln Way 210 Board of Education meeting for February 20, 2025 to order. Please stand for the pledge if you're able. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, can you please call the roll?
Dana Berthold.
Here.
Catherine Johnson.
Here.
Joseph Kostick.
Here.
Richard Lacine.
Here.
Caitlin Olenek. Deidre Stokes.
Here.
Aaron Janet.
Here. All right, we'll jump right into our presentations this evening, and first up is the district brand refresh.
Okay, so I'm here to talk to you about the district brand refresh project. I popped that old brown logo up there one more time so we can say goodbye to it. I'm sure everyone's sad about that. So we're going to talk about the timeline first. In December 2017, branding was identified as a goal by the Strategic Planning Committee, but it wasn't completed at that time, so it was brought up again last December by our current Strategic Plan Committee. It was approved by the board as part of the strategic plan. In May of 2024, the board approved our brand refresh partner, CELPR. They signed on not only to do the design services, but also to help us facilitate the focus groups and gathering feedback. So they were sort of an unbiased third party to help us with that process. We'll talk about the process on the next slide. Between September and December, we gathered feedback, conducted the focus groups, had lots and lots of discussion about what our new brand should look like. In January, we were presented with the complete draft brand, so I have all the deliverables in my possession, which is exciting. February 2025, here we are. We're going to ask you later today in the agenda to approve the draft brand. So we'll have from now until July to sort of turn over the old brand, phase out the brown. Physical and digital versions of that logo will be gone by August, and then August we would officially have our new brand in place. So diving into the process, so we could have just gone to a graphic designer and said, hey, whip us up a new logo, but because our school community is so large and has lots of different perspectives, we thought we should do it the right way and get everybody's perspective and make sure that everyone is reflected in the new brand. So in September, CEL came out and did some school tours. So they went to all 3 buildings just to get a feel for how the brands exist in our schools. So the colors, the logos, the mascots, but also just to get a feel for the climate of our schools, the way our students are behaving in the schools, just our culture. At the end of that day, they came back here to Central, and we had an admin team focus group that was district and building admin, and they just collected historical information about the district, why we're rebranding, what we wanted to see in the new brand moving forward. So that was the initial focus group. They took all of that information and they came up with 2 concepts for us to review in October. So those 2 concepts included logos, but they also include things like a color palette, fonts, graphic design patterns that we can use that'll become the graphic identity of the district. Excuse me. We brought in at that time 2 additional focus groups, so District 210 Advisory, which as you know is made up of parents, community members, staff members, students, et cetera, so a wide array of perspectives in that group. And then we also had a student-only focus group, which was 15 students, all grade levels across all buildings. And that was probably my favorite part, to sit in and hear what the kids had to say, because they're always really insightful. And I was the only administrator there, so they could sort of speak freely, because they don't really know me. So that was great to have their feedback. After those first 2 focus groups, when they were presented with the concepts, it was decided that while we originally thought we were going to go completely in the opposite direction from where our current logo stands, we needed something that was still recognizable in the community as a Lincoln Way logo. We didn't want to have to reteach the community what our brand was or what we stood for. So after that first round of focus groups, they came back to us with a 3rd concept. It was just the logo that was redone, so we did keep color palettes, fonts, those types of of things, but the logo was redone. District 210 Advisory and the admin team then provided some feedback on that initial version of the third concept, and the final brand was brought to the student focus group, so they were able to provide live feedback. The 210 Advisory and the admin team were unable to provide real-time feedback, so we sent them a survey. This next slide has a couple of screenshots from that survey. The first graph represents feelings about the brand elements, so colors, fonts, patterns, graphics, and you can see that trends in the positive direction. And then the second graph is about the logo specifically, and also trending in the positive direction. Because the students weren't reflected in this survey, I wanted to bring some of their feedback back to you just so you could see some of their insights. So these are just quotes that I jotted down during their final focus group. I'll just read through them quickly. The brand has really evolved since we saw it the last time. It's very satisfying to look at. All of our feedback was really taken into consideration, and I can see it coming through in this new logo. It was awesome to come up with the idea of a rebrand for the district. The brown logo doesn't showcase all of the schools to show unity. This does a good job of that. And the last one I'll share with you is my art teacher, who's a traveling teacher, wears the old brown logo on his shirt because he wants to represent all three schools. I can see him getting an updated t-shirt with the new logo and showing the unity among the schools. This will work really well. And I think that can sort of translate for all of our traveling teachers, all of our district-wide programs. I don't think anyone wanted to take ownership of wearing brown all the time, so they sort of took the liberty of making up their own identity, and this will sort of bring them all back underneath the umbrella of the district. So with that, this is sort of your first peek at the new logo. So you see the LW210, it's still there, but it's not brown anymore. And we have all three school colors incorporated. That was really important. There's also an equal amount of all three colors. That came up in several focus groups who wanted to make sure there was equal representation. So this is just sort of the first version of it, but you'll see later on we have a lot of flexibility to use this logo in different ways. As a reminder, this is our mission statement. Sometimes in a branding process, you will come out with a new mission statement, but we felt that this still really aligns with what we're trying to do for our school community, so we kept it. But what we did do is pull out some of the key messages, the key words from this mission statement, and create a tagline that makes it a little bit more condensed and easier to digest, so we can use these words without having to memorize this whole long paragraph and still get to the point of what we're trying to do here. So you'll see our very dynamic tagline that moves. It essentially reads where academics, experiences, and opportunities thrive. So those three words were pulled directly from the mission statement. There was a lot of deliberation about what words we should pull out. At one point, there were 4 words here, but because we have 3 schools and 3 colors, we felt 3 words made sense, kind of brings the brand identity full circle. So that's where we ended up. We do have this in a static format if we need to use it that way, but this will work for videos, social media, even projecting in our schools on our monitors that we have across the district. And then the last slide I have, these are all of the different versions of the logo that we have. So we can pull out that LW210 symbol. We can use it as a badge. We also have the vertical and horizontal version with both the badge and the symbol. And these are all the full color versions, but obviously we have them in black and white as well. So lots of options, way more versatile than the brown. And like I said, we'll be asking you to approve or adopt the brand later on in the agenda, but I will open it up to any questions if there are any.
Any questions for Jen?
Great job.
Yeah,
Thanks.
no, that's really nice. All right, we'll move on to the life safety financing scenarios presentation. Hard act to follow there.
So that was way more fun. Well, this will also be riveting.
Yes. A lot of color in this one.
Yeah, maybe not as quite as colorful. We do have our friend Bob back with us from PMA, and Mike's going to start off, and then Bob Lewis will be here to answer any particular questions and also kind of go over the nuts and bolts of some of the, some of the bonding issues and challenges that we would have. So, Mike, if you want to go ahead and get started.
Perfect, thank you. At last month's board meeting, we talked about our work over the past several months with our architects and facility improvements DLA recently amended, as we had shared, our district's life safety needs on file with the Illinois State Board of Education. And our administrative team has talked with our architects now about the best way to address these life safety items within the greater context of our full capital improvements plan district-wide. Last month, we promised to bring additional information back, and that's the purpose of tonight's board meeting. As Bob and I walk through these slides, if you have any questions, let us know. Over the past several years, the district has addressed facility needs strategically whenever we've been able to do that. We developed and we now maintain a much more comprehensive 10-year capital improvements plan. Chuck has done a really nice job updating that and enhancing that. In 2020, as you know, the board charged our architects to complete a full facility assessment, 400 and something pages in detail of specs and updated priority rankings and recommendations. These are the documents that we use when we sit down as an administrative team and come to you every year with the sort of annual request for bids and summer projects. That being said, one of our biggest constraints has been funding. We've been able to catch up in some of the areas like what you see here on the screen, to some degree on parking lots and roof replacements, but what that has forced us to do is perhaps delay projects in other areas. So we've allocated monies to the roofs, to the parking lots, but then we weren't able to move forward on a new field renovation or library furniture. So we've had to be choosy and make some different decisions internally. As you may recall, there were multiple summers where the district pursued no capital improvements at all. So we had 2 years where Lincoln Way did no capital improvements, and that was an intentional effort as we restored and reestablished our fund balances in our operating budget. I'd like to make a note on the second bullet point here, the partial or phased completion. We've worked very creatively as an administrative team, both at the district and building level, to move projects forward even when we haven't had the funds to do so fully anyway. Whether that's band lockers, flooring across the district, art room cabinets, library furniture, you'll see a picture of that in a minute. All of these are purchased and completed in multiple phases. So although economies of scale, simple efficiency, everyone would like to see a project from start through completion. But we haven't been able to do that, and so instead of waiting, we've tried to phase things in whenever possible. On this slide, you can see this was an attachment shared as an additional piece of information last month. Just a simple comparison to some other high schools in the area. If you look at that bottom line, other districts, and in this case 230 and Lockport on the screen, spent between $2.5 and $3 million per school per summer in terms of facility needs, renovations, and improvements. And we've been able to tackle about $700,000. So you can see the difference in there, and then also how that compounds over time, over an 8-year time span. For both District 230 and for Lockport, Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, but you can see some summers where, and I think it's 21 and 24 for District 230, 2018 for Lockport, but worth noting, I believe these districts also had some bond issuances to accomplish some of this work.
Yeah, those were years in which there's an infusion of cash from bond issue.
Okay. Sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words. So there are a lot of images I could share, but I think just showing this one will illustrate some of the constraint I'm describing. What you see here is the partial completion of library updates at Lincoln Way Central. So what we were able to tackle, I mean, we could have just done lights across the ceiling and been done with it. But instead, what Principal McNamara and Chuck Welke and our team talked through was, let's tackle a section of it, do lighting, flooring. At one point, I believe we had consulted with the architects on a grander scale, but also decided, in this case, a more practical approach moving forward. And so to make it affordable, as you can see on the left side, we're very happy with it. I think our library staff, building administration would say students are in, they're using it, it's fantastic. And yet there's also the odd dichotomy as our students walk through the space every day. As you can see the right half of the library, it sort of gives that juxtaposition. And that's not the look that we want. That's not the way we would love to approach it, but that's what we've needed to do to progress it forward. And so our goal is to get this done in the next summer or two. So that brings us to today. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we're not perfect in some areas, but we've at least been able to catch up on roofs, parking lots to some degree. But one area we've not been able to address more systemically, and that's just because the dollar values here are so much more substantial, is HVAC. Our highest priorities in review with our architects are air handlers, chillers, boilers, building controls. Just looking at a map of Lincoln Way East, for example, everything in red and orange represents HVAC units that need to be replaced. And I'll add a comment to say some of that dark orange was approaching end of life, and as they did their more recent assessment and submitted submittals to the state, those are at end of life as well. So these aren't like units in our home, as you know, so it's not like replacing an air handler is the same as a $5,000 to $6,000 air conditioning unit in a residential home. So the dollar values are big here. As we mentioned last month, the district is required to be evaluated at least every 10 years for staying in compliance with health and life safety codes. Amendments can be and are made as needed. So in our work with DLA, our architects submitted their findings to the state and itemized all of those HVAC life safety violations. I believe you saw that itemized list last month in the informational part of the board agenda. Once again, the state reviewed and approved those submittals and authorized the district with board approval only to locally fund those projects. That total of project approvals through the state came out to $30,420,000. And so knowing we have significant work to complete, our administrative team and what we brought, between last month and now, it's weighing the pros and cons of completing the work and pursuing it now, going out to bid in the fall, moving forward, versus chunking it and completing these in pieces over 10 years. Some of those considerations, as you can see here, are present-day cost versus future cost, economies of scale in the bids and contracts, and eliminating what has ended up being, through a pretty deep dive, some pretty significant ongoing repair costs to old units. I think Dr. Tingley mentioned last month that we have a unit from 1970. Yep. So, decades and decades old. In my review of some vendor data and repair costs just on HVAC equipment, we're between $350,000 and $400,000 a year just in repair costs where we're throwing money at those older units. So one option, one funding mechanism to get these HVAC improvements done would be the operating budget. So what you can see on this slide is a summary of the 5-year financial forecast that I presented to the board in October. The red lines, and I know it's small here on the screen, but if you look in your own packet materials, as you can see in red, we projected between $3 and $3.5 million a year in transfers from the operating budget into the capital projects fund for all of our capital improvements. And I do feel it's important to note that's for all of our capital improvements. That transfer was not necessarily a projected allocation just for the HVAC needs. That's for everything that we need to accomplish by using the operating budget. Some of that might be for non-life safety projects, or the board may wish, in adopting future budgets, to shift some of this transfer into other things like the financing to own model that we switched to for purchasing buses this past year. That's a fiscally responsible decision by the board to do that because it's going to save a lot of money in the long term. What we might need to do, though, is factor things like that into some of this money. So again, I just want to note that that's all encompassing for the $3 to $3.5 million. The second mechanism to fund the capital improvements that qualify as life safety would be through life safety bonds. And as Dr. Tingley mentioned, we have Bob Lewis from PMA Securities with us tonight, and I'm going to turn it over to Bob to walk through a little bit of what this might look like.
Thank you, Mike. So, life safety bonds, as Mike mentioned, offer a second funding mechanism. Now, life safety bonds have always existed as part of the school code. The change that occurred in the law was to level the playing field for school districts to access financing to pay for the life safety improvements if that's the direction the district wanted to go. So non-tax cap school districts are not restricted by something called a debt service extension base, which is an arbitrary restraint that was placed on school districts when tax caps came into existence in their county. So if you're in a non-tax cap school district, you can go sell life safety bonds and have been able to do so ever since they created the life safety code back in the 60s, I believe. And if you're in a tax cap county and you happen to have a debt service extension base, like Lockport and Orland 230, and those districts were able to issue bonds to finance capital projects. Lincoln Way 210 does not have a debt service extension base simply because you were not levying for non-referendum bonds, life safety, working cash, any type of non-referendum bond in 1994. So with this new law, it now makes this available for all school districts, whether you have a DSEB or not, whether you're in tax cap county or not. And logically, it makes sense because all districts are told by ISB to do their life safety analysis. It's a mandate. And for those school districts that couldn't borrow, it may be an unfunded mandate because your only other options then are to find the resources within your operating budget or to go to referendum. So this was a nice reform to make it a level playing field for all school districts. In order to do a life safety bond, though, you do have to have the approvals. You can't by yourself determine that you're going to sell a life safety bond for whatever amount you do, and you've gone through that process with ISB. You do have to have a hearing about holding or selling the life safety bonds. It's similar to your budget hearing or your tax levy hearing. And then it requires board approval via resolution to sell the bonds. So there's 2 steps that the board has to do. Well, 3 if you count applying for the life safety approvals to begin with. So over the last 3 years, the district's tax burden through the refunding that was accomplished in the beginning of 2022, I'm going to walk through some of those details now, reduced the tax burden for taxpayers by more than $25 million through that refunding. Yeah. In January, February 22, you refinanced $130 million of bonds and locked in that extraordinarily low interest rate of 1.76%. Your timing was perfect in getting that done. If we had waited till later in the fall, your savings probably would have been half or less. So it was a good strategy by the board to take advantage of something you may recall was called a forward refunding, where we locked in the rate in January, even though we didn't close to October of later that year. And in addition, in levy years 22, 23, and 24, the district used funds to abate $3.5 million worth of debt service. So there's an additional $3.5 million that the taxpayers didn't have to pay on top of the $25 million over the remaining term of the bonds. So this slide represents what your debt service was before and what it was after the plan was completed. The gray area represents what you would have paid prior to refunding the bonds. So your debt service was stair-stepping upwards every year, all the way through the final year, and reaching a peak of $40 million that year. A little bit of background information in introducing a slide. Just as a reminder, the years on the bottom, those are levy years. So for example, levy year 19, it was for taxes that are collected in 20 to make bond payments in the summer of 20, and then the big payment in January of 21. So just keep in mind the levy years versus tax collection, but we're referring to levy years. So if you want to get to when you pay the taxes, just add 1 year to that. So after accomplishing the refunding, the steps, 7 steps, stair steps, if you will, were eliminated in the increases of your debt service. We still had a few more steps to get to that goal of a level overall payment. And we did that, again, by locking in a lower rate, extending the payment by just 2 years. The board had looked at several scenarios, extending it possibly even further, but decided 2 years was enough to get to our objective. And those stair steps that remained from levy year 19 through 23 fluctuated somewhere between $1.5 to $2 million because of the abatements. The most recent stair step was the smallest of all. It was under $1 million, and that's because we had gotten to that peak amount. So this next slide just summarizes everything I just said, but at least it gives you everything I said in note form, so you can take that with you. So the next slide shows you your debt service that remains after the restructuring, after you've made a few years. So you've achieved and reached level debt service. So as of now, there are no more increases in the payments. Levy year 24, as a reminder, that's going to be for taxes collected this summer of 25. So you're down to having 10 years left of your bonds, which when you look at where you came and to where you are now, it's an extraordinary process that the district has completed. So what about the financial stability? What do outside third parties say about the district? So there are two credit agencies that local units of government use. There are others that are also available, Fitch, and there's even one that's not here that are primarily used by the larger units of government. So originally you had a Moody's rating, and when your financial difficulties were at their peak, your rating fell all the way down to BA1. I think it was at AA3 before then. And you have climbed back upwards and gotten to an A1. When we did the bond financing in 2022, Moody's had not returned you to the A1 category yet, and we really need to get a higher rating to help get the best rate possible from JP Morgan Chase in that financing. So we went to Standard & Poor's to get a fresh look. And Standard & Poor's assigned a rating of A+. So eventually Moody's caught up to them, and they're at the A1. I think you got upgraded last year by Moody's. So in any financing that the board decides to proceed with, we have to get it rated again. You have to ask them to update their analysis. In discussing this approach with the administration, it's my recommendation as of now, I want to do a little bit more analysis, but that for these financings that you might do, whether it's this or the debt certificate for the bus leases, that we would consider using Standard & Poor's. Reason being is Moody's just upgraded you, and it's not often that they'll upgrade folks in consecutive years. Well, Standard & Poor's has not looked at the district since January of 22. Since that time, you've completed 3 audits. And usually that to get the upgrades, they want to see audited data. So 3 audits is a volume of data for them to consider, and those 3 audits all show a good story. So I'd be hopeful that Standard & Poor's would get you into that AA category. No, what's that? Oh, and because right now your rating is not really showing the true credit strength of this district. It takes time. It takes time because you just got to get away from those years that were challenging for them to say, okay, things are stable here, and they've been stable for a long time, and you get sort of what that natural rating is. I think your natural rating is at least the mid AA, if not the upper AA, and I'm making that basis, or making that comment on the basis of your debt plan is finalized, your EAV growth has been strong, the amount of new property you get is, I was telling Mike, I don't have any clients that get as much new property as you guys do. And financially, your finances are strong as well. You've achieved your goal of 33% fund balance. So, and then the last thing you don't really have control over, but it's good data for you, is your wealth levels in this community are really more supportive of a AA rating. So I can't guarantee that you'll get into the AA category, but I think there's a strong possibility. Next, the state does its own credit analysis. It's not as robust as what the credit agencies do, but the district has achieved financial recognition by ISB, and that's remarkable, again, to get back to that point considering where you were just a few years ago. And you've had it for 3 years in a row, and it's anticipated that you will get it for the 4th year in a row. And with the policies and practices you put in place, I assume that streak will continue for several years. Okay, so with that backdrop, we have brought us right back to where we are today, talking about the life safety bonds. And in this scenario, we're showing the issuance of approximately 30 million, somewhere between 30 and 31 million is the amount of life safety bonds. And then the objective would be to minimize the impact to the taxpayer, knowing that, not counting levy year 24 because you've already levied and are extending those taxes, you have 9 years left, and then amortize the principal after your prior bonds are gone. So the I'm sorry, I couldn't read my chicken scratch there. My colleagues always make fun of my handwriting, and it's pretty bad when I'm sitting here and can't read it myself. So the bonds would, so if the district were to do this and increase the bond levy, essentially what you'd be doing is adding one more step of debt service. So you have $1.5 million would be the additional amount you're levying each year, and that $1.5 million is essentially less than most of the years of your stair steps that you're experiencing as you got to this level point. And those $1.5 million, that includes some principal, not a lot, but it includes some principal, the bulk of the principal in those last 2 years. And one thing I'll point out is when we get to the summary, you'll see that the amount you borrow and the amount you pay back is about 1.5 times what you borrow. Now, when you look at, for example, what we pay back on our mortgage, generally it's more than that 1.5 times. And a lot of my clients that do, for example, a new referendum bond, they're going to do a 20-year bond, and they're going to make level payments for all 20 years. The average life of that bond is about 12 years. That's the point at which half the principal is paid off. Well, on those type of 20-year level debt service financing, where it's the same payment every year, they pay back about 1.5 times. So even though you're paying very little principal for the first 9 years, the fact that you're paying off the majority of the principal just 10 and 11 years later means your average life is equal to or a little less than a school district that does the typical 20-year level debt service bond that also has that ratio of 1.5 payback to borrowed. The next slide provides just the background that goes into the graph. The one thing I will point out that doesn't stand out in the graph is that orange line represents levy year 24 for taxes collected this year. There is an interest payment that would occur on the life safety bonds that's not showing up on the graph, and you couldn't levy for that even if you wanted to because you had to sell the bonds by now to establish a new levy to be collected this summer, but you would have a first interest payment of $782,000. So working with the administration, you do have in the bond and interest fund dollars already on hand to cover that interest payment, which is good because if you didn't, what we typically do when you're between levy cycles like that is you would borrow a little bit more to pay for that interest payment. So you have the money already in your debt service fund to cover that, so that reduces some of the costs that you would have on this plan of finance. And where does that money come from? Well, your annual levy is about $27 million. With investment rates, what they've been the last few years, you earn 4.5%, 5% and $27 million. That's going to accumulate some funds in that account that can be used to pay debt service. So here's the aforementioned summary. And so the life safety proceeds in the far right column, whether you have where it's called levied interest payments, the interest rate is estimated 4.25%, and that's adding a 0.25% cushion. So if you sold in today's market, it'd be right around 4%, which is very similar to some of the 20-year financings we sold this week that came out at the rate close to 4%. And again, that's because your average life is similar to the average life of a 20-year level debt service financing. Your payback would be about $45 million, and the impact to a $400,000 home if the board were to levy that full additional $1.5 million would be $37 per year. But once you increase it $37, then it would stay that way for those 9 years until you experience that drop off after the 9th year. We also put together a scenario I'll show you on the next slide where you abate that full payment, and then there would be no impact to the taxpayer. Now here you'll see on top of levy year 24, that's that portion that you're paying from the funds you already have in the debt service fund, which you'll be paying from the debt service fund regardless in both scenarios. And then those other years, we shaded it differently. I think it's a shade of red, and which is not necessarily the best picture or color to pick for a financial presentation, but I'll fix that for the future. But that represents an abated amount. So you're paying that from operating funds in this scenario, so there'd be no additional taxes placed on the taxpayer. And I think Mike's going to talk a little bit more about that strategy here in a moment. So I will summarize just what I've covered, and then I'll turn the baton back over to Mike. So the life safety bonds, if the board were to consider doing them, would create an additional step in the staircase plan of finance. As a reminder, 7 steps were removed, so you would essentially have now, if you were to do this, would have removed 6 steps. And that's $1.5 million is the amount of that step, which is about $37 for a $400,000 home, one-time increase. And then it flattens out after calendar year, or then the amount would be $28.5 million until the bonds are retired. And then it would be $15.8 million roughly in those 2 years that are added at the end. And that would be approximately 55% of what it was the prior year. So your taxpayers would see a decline in their tax bills that year, even though you added those 2 payments. And I know you have under consideration a board policy as it relates to debt service or debt, and this plan of finance would comply with that policy if you were to approve it as it's currently written.
Real quick question, Bob, and this, I know most of us here know the answer, that having that flat dollar amount, just speak briefly to the impact of our continued growth in our EAV and then that impact or effect to each individual homeowner.
Yes. So, yeah, so when you have a flat payment, as new property comes in, they pick up their share of the debt levy, so everyone else's share of the debt levy goes down. It's sort of like if you think of yourself as a school district, your household budget. If you have a flat car payment, $500 a month, and you get a raise, well, now that $500 you're paying towards your car payment is a smaller percentage of your overall budget. Your car payment doesn't go up because you got a raise. And the same thing happens for your debt when you have a flat structure. That's why the board set the objective to get to a flat structure, so then as new property came in, everybody's share of that debt burden would decline.
And also in this scenario, we have proposed maybe 15 years out. This scenario would go back considerably to that 12, which is kind of where some of us were at the very beginning, but would still provide some flexibility.
Real quick, just one final point. We talked last month about present-day cost versus future. I just wanted to give one piece of detail tonight in terms of the differences that we project. And again, these are estimates because we're looking into the future. But on this slide, what you can see, there's 2 columns with dollar amounts in them. The column on the left outlines estimated net cost to the district if the board wishes to pursue the life safety improvements now via bond funds. The column on the right shows net cost if we were to tackle the projects in those smaller chunks over the course of the next 10 years. On the left, we pay interest on the bonds. Obviously, we hope that 4.25 comes in lower, but want to be reasonable with the projection here tonight. And then we also earn investment interest while that cash is on hand for the project payouts. So the net cost, as we estimate it, is roughly $44 million. On the right, we have poured over vendor data, spoken with our architects, market surveys. We've tried to put together, and I think these are fair. If anything, I think they're a little conservative in terms of what the estimates are. And so, as I've mentioned before, obviously it'll cost more to replace the same units in future costs, continued repair needs. You lose that economy of scale from bidding. So estimated costs doing that over time are 41.4. And speaking just financially, the point I wanted to make from this, and just from my seat and my lens, is the return on investment for the dollar difference is, 1, increased building efficiencies now and over the next 10 years through our buildings, right, in terms of operations. And then 2, the operating funds regained to complete other capital improvements that we need to do that are not HVAC or life safety related. So that's the other part, and that's kind of the text underneath that table. That's difficult to quantify over the next 10 years in terms of a dollar amount. But that's the flexibility in the operating budget that we regain. And those non-life safety, non-HVAC capital improvements and facility improvements obviously still have a very important benefit to our students' experience while they're here at Lincoln Way. Final slide tonight shows a possible timeline. Oh, yes, sir.
Over the 10-year plan, did you take in the operating repair costs?
Yeah, so what it was is not only did we factor in that first line, the inflationary costs of doing them, but that second line, that 1.886 million, and again, I think that's conservative. That's what we would spend on the old units, even in a phased repair approach, because obviously, if one of the boilers at East is failing now and we don't replace it till year 4, theoretically, in this kind of chunking plan, we're gonna have repair costs for years 1, 2, and 3. So we factored all of that into this. Yep. I think it is conservative, but again, trying to be fair, and I don't want to present anything we
These
can't.
3 years, yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Good question, thank you. So our final slide tonight then shows a possible timeline of next steps. Bob talked about this a little bit. Is there anything else you want to walk through in terms of required components?
So as I mentioned, the procedures that the district board would have to do if it wants to proceed is the president would sign an order calling for the BINA hearing. BINA stands for Bond Issue Notification Act. And that gets published in local paper to notify your public that you're going to have this hearing. It would be on March 20th. And then the next month is when the board would take action to approve a resolution authorizing the bond sale. Somewhere around late April, mid to late April is when we would get a rating update, which right now we would anticipate would be Standard & Poor's. We would ask for that update from. And then you'd have the bond sale on May 5th. That's when the rate would be locked in. And you would receive the funds on June the 2nd. And then you would have, because you would be selling these as tax-exempt bonds, you have to have a reasonable expectation that you would spend 85% in 3 years. And I believe you and I have discussed, and the district would be able to meet that requirement.
If we didn't meet that requirement, what happens? It become taxable?
No, they don't become taxable. There's more restrictions placed on the investment of the bonds. For the first 3 years, you can earn at a rate above the rate you borrowed at. You might have to pay it back if you don't spend it fast enough, but after the 3 years, you're not even allowed to do that. You're not, so you have to restrict the type of investments you would do.
Any questions?
Maybe this is not the best question, but are there any other factors that could impact any fluctuation with once this is set and those bonds have been purchased and everything? Is there something that could be unpredictable that might cause any of these costs to shift year to year?
Yeah, no, it's a fixed rate bond, so once it's sold, the rate's locked in, and nothing can change on that.
Okay, so as a community member, if I know that this is my increase and it's less than $40 a year, that's going to stay stable for the length of this, and they're still going to get all the improvements that are a part of
Yeah.
this grant.
The bond payment would stay stable. Your share of the bill would likely go down because of new property coming in. But if you, for example, were in an area of the district that had a substantially larger reassessment applied to your subdivision or something, I mean, your share could go up. Or if you add on to your house, your share could go up. So you can't say it universally, but yeah, your share should be about that and hopefully go down with new property coming in.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Speaking
Because
of
it-
new property coming in, the growth that we had anticipated, or the last 3 years were about 6.14%, I think, averaged, with a low of 4.37, but then we project 3.5% for a few years, down to 3, down to 2.5. Obviously, you can't project 10 years out for growth. That's a little hard, but why are we so low compared to the last few years in terms of our growth?
You're talking new property, new
Yeah,
construction,
yes.
like for the tax levy?
Yeah.
That's only because the trend is it had slowed from its peak of 81 million. So over the last couple of years, and as we look at that November, December timeline, one of the things the county's been doing is giving kind of a middle adjustment. They'll give preliminary data in September, and then I've been working with them in November for adjustments so that our levies can be more accurate. I feel good about our new construction being stable, but it did pull back from 2 or 3 years ago when it had peaked at that 81 million. So we've been closer to that 60 mark.
Well, and in addition, as the rest of your EAV appreciates and gets larger, a stable, fixed amount of new property is going to become a smaller and smaller percentage of a larger and larger tax base. So it's harder to maintain a percentage over time because the tax base is getting larger and larger and larger.
And then you were talking about the rating increase possibly, and I was looking at the, I think it's Moody's, we were at A1, if we went, and I'll just use that because it's on my notes here.
Sure.
So if we went Moody's A1 to AA3 or AA2 even, what does that do for us? Get us a better rate, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I'd say each notch is roughly 0.1% of a better rate. You know, maybe 0.15. It just varies
Yeah.
depending on the market, but at least 0.1 for each step up.
So maybe 4%, then maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe 3.89.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Let me see what else I have here. Anyone else have any questions?
If there was any leftover money, I know it's, if, like you say, I know if we're talking about 30 million here, let's just say we do these life safety projects, year one, there's 3 million left over, let's say, because we, bid conservatively. Can that money be used only for life safety, or can it be used for any capital project?
It can only be used for life safety projects. You could use it to abate the bond levy for that, but it can only be those two things.
Gotcha. That was the second part of my follow-up, as far as bond abatement, for called no prepayment penalty, for lack of a better word.
Well, the bonds are will not be callable for, typically municipal bonds are not callable for 8 to 9 years after issuance.
Gotcha.
So you could, if there's funds left over, you could use it to abate that levy for that year. So, and use those dollars instead to pay that. That's not reducing any principal, but it's
I
reducing the
understand.
burden on the taxpayer. But once you get to the call date, you could then redeem bonds and pay them off.
Gotcha. So if we had extra money laying around in 2034, 2035, we could potentially retire that early, because that's going to be a much smaller percentage of our overall budget by that, I would think, in 10 years from now with our
Assuming
projected
Lincoln-
growth.
I think Lincoln Way West will probably have to be analyzed at that point.
The way this is kind of designed, and this would be a whole different talk that some of my administrators have had to listen to, prior to this legislation, we were inevitably going to have to go to referendum here in the next 5 to 6 years. I had already kind of worked on that, had that set up, and had all the talking points ready to go. But this new legislation, as Bob said, leveled the playing field and gave everybody an opportunity. Lamont just recently had passed a referendum in a similar situation as we were. They were about 4 years out, I think, from retiring their debt, and they were able to extend that debt out to provide opportunities that we're talking about here. So this is a situation where at least every 2 to 3 years, I think future administrative teams will bring back to the board saying, okay, here's now where we're at on some of the life safety, and be very cognizant of a policy for long-term debt. But as mentioned, by the time we're wrapping up our $28.5 million payments, we're going to be looking at West, roofs, parking lots, HVAC, and that's where this is going to fit very nicely in a strategic ongoing plan. I think it's very important that we stay conservative and responsible, as we've been since we've all been at this table. And I think that's kind of the process here. And as Bob alluded, many of these districts are going out 20 years. They passed the legislation to go out 30. I don't know if you have anybody going 30, but that's a lot.
Yeah.
But staying within that 10 to 12 area does mitigate some of those costs. And it will be nice once we're done with the 28 million and we're looking at that 15 to 16 million a year, because there will be a noticeable reduction in your taxes, dollars in the pocket at that point, and then kind of seeing where you go in the future. So that's just kind of a synopsis from that point. But this does help us gain on some of those areas. Some of the things that we're doing now, we're doing siding on the dugouts. I've received emails from board members with concerns about press boxes falling over. They're right. No, they weren't going to fall over, but we did have to replace some of the siding and do some of those things. We haven't purchased any desks, classroom desks or furniture since I've been superintendent. Our maintenance staff does a great job of taking pieces together and repurposing desks. We took all the desks out of North and got, we're able to replace some, but that's something we'll have to look at. Cafeteria tables, roofs, parking lots, field house floors. The floors are original here. I think we've had one seal coat at East and one at Central of the playing surfaces, but the tracks, just one time, I think, Chuck, or not, maybe one time. And so those are well, they're 30 years old now. So we're in a position where this type of project would allow us the flexibility to get some of those other things done as well.
Couple more questions. So I'll call them the big bonds, the ones that make up the 27 million. Are there any kind of covenants in there that if we were to take on additional debt, that would trigger any sort of covenant to make those bonds taxable, callable, whatever, any kind of penalty, if you
Yeah.
will?
No, there's no penalty. That's a good question because there are certain types of municipal bonds. Usually those are more with like utility systems and stuff like that might have additional bond tests, but it's not typical for general obligation bonds to have those.
And then as we're talking about doing other projects, that the 3.5 million that we are pre-funding, I think it's this year, it's 4.5, could some of that money be used? You know, we're gonna use maybe 500,000 of that, and not have to borrow as much, right? Because if we use 500,000 of that over the next 10 years, that's 5 million. And we don't have to borrow 30, we can borrow 25, which makes that $37, I don't know, 18. Just questions and throwing things out there. That's-
Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, we would still have to borrow it up front. We would just take some of that operation money to then abate that. That would be the process, because I believe, if I'm not mistaken, or bond attorneys had said, you kind of have to commit to the whole thing and then abate and not say, well, we'll earmark, we're going to pay $1 million a year. If you or Mike could speak to that, Bob.
Yeah, I'll address that, and then the concept of the $500,000 a year for 10 years, it goes to accessing those $500,000 in the outer years because you need it today. So, so that's one factor to consider. And as far as the abatement goes, when you sell any type of general obligation bond, the resolution that you approved for that bond is filed with Will County, and the clerk's office will extend the taxes in that resolution unless you tell them to do something otherwise. And that's required by law because you've made a general obligation unlimited tax pledge to your bondholders, and that requires you put this levy on file. So annually, if the district wants to reduce that levy through the abatement process, you have to pass a resolution each year to do that. You can't upfront say we're going to commit $500,000 a year or something towards that. It'd be a decision by the board each year, and you have to set aside those funds at the time you would make the abatement. It has to be a covered abatement is what we say, which is, Mike and I have worked through all those logistics, if that's the direction the board decides to go, of how you would do that. But that's, you're talking about the bond covenants. That is one covenant there that you won't abate taxes prior to setting aside. In fact, when you've done some abatements over the last few years, the 2.5 million-ish that we did the first year of the funding plan, you already had that money. You set it aside in the debt service fund. And then we did a couple more smaller abatements, and that was done with the interest that you had accrued in the escrow from the refunding, and you used that to do the abatements. So you had that money on hand when you did the abatements is what I'm trying to get to.
And then the forward funding that you were talking about earlier, would we be doing that again on this sale?
Do a forward with this sale or do a refunding of this in the future?
Well, you mentioned that we locked in, we closed, I think it was in January, and then we set it in January, then closed in October or whatever.
Right.
The dates. Would we be doing that again?
No, you would be closing approximately 3 weeks after the sale, which is actually more advantageous for you because you'll be able to earn interest on those dollars at a rate higher than you borrowed at.
Okay, got it. Any other questions? Looked like you had something, no? Anybody else? Is this the best we can do on this right now, this proposal? Is this it? No sharpening of the pencils, anything else?
Well, you could do better if the market gets a little better, you know? And we added a 0.25% cushion into it. And if you get the upgrade, that's more cushion built into it. But, between now and May 5th, which sounds so good right now, it's so cold outside. But there's a lot of news that still needs to happen. There's a lot of tariffs and other things that are still hanging out there, and what that might do to inflation. And hopefully we get decent economic reports between now and then. There's nothing that rattles the markets, and then that rate would be better when you would sell the bonds.
All right. I don't have anything else. I mean, I do. I could probably talk about it all night, but everyone wants to go home. No, I mean, we'll probably, if there's any other questions over the next few weeks. I mean,
Yeah, and that's with the, back to the time frame. We would, the only thing we would need this evening is the president signing an order for a binding hearing. And so then we would do that binding hearing next month, correct? And so, yeah, long as,
is that a special pen?
now, as long as the president says, let's have a hearing, then we'll do that in March. And then if that goes well and the board is comfortable with where we are in March, then in April, we would approve the parameters resolution and then move forward with the next steps. And we can have more discussion between now and then and the 1.5 million. One of the things is as Bob alluded to, this can be an annual discussion. Like if we didn't have capital needs that year, then maybe there's some money to do that. If we're able to utilize other ways to generate revenue, that could certainly go towards these bonds as we work through that. But that can be an annual discussion as we set a plan moving forward.
I don't see me signing an order on the agenda.
Doesn't need to. That's all on you.
Are you guys good with me signing an order?
It just gives us a hearing. Yeah.
Quick question. So we go through this process early summer. What is our design time? So you're thinking this work will be 26, 27 or 27, 28?
26, 27, and some of that design work has already been done
Right.
with DLA and Berg. But in terms of sort of direction from the board, it's sort of we want to say some parallel motion maybe in terms of hearings and financing if the board supports that direction, but then also continued design work with architects. And so we would be looking at, and I'm looking at Scott and Chuck, I think like a summer, maybe late summer, September kind of bidding timeline.
It's going to be
Of this year?
Correct. September, October, this coming fall.
For the 2-year project or just the
Correct.
start of it?
Nope.
For the haul in?
Yep.
So then we wouldn't start paying out the money till 26. So to your point that we're gonna earn more than we're paying, that 12 years is really gonna become 10 because the interest will offset itself, right? Am I thinking of that right?
I like your thinking. I hope it's that much. I hope it's that much, but we would be earning at a higher rate. So
Right.
your point is, will we be earning the investments? And I agree with you. Yes, we'll have
We- I mean,
investment
we get
earnings
the
while
money,
cash
we
is on
can
hand.
invest it.
You are
but
correct.
it's it, and we wouldn't pay it out for at least a year. So you're gonna wipe 1 year of interest off.
That's right. We need the cash on hand because what will happen is we'll need to pay DLA design fees
Yes,
and
but
maybe
that
some
will be-
smaller vendor
Right.
costs along
Those
the
are
way.
percentages.
Yeah,
Yes.
that would
Yes.
be a very small percentage of
That's
the
right.
actual work year.
That's right.
So before we spend it all, it would be almost 28 by the time we final paid it out. It would be 2028.
In theory,
By the
yeah.
time we close the job out and had spent the whole 30 million.
or very late 27, probably. Yeah.
So late 27, early 28, yes.
All right.
Well,
Correct.
Can I make a comment on the additional information? So one thing to be aware of is while you can earn positive arbitrage, is what we call it, you have to meet certain spin downs in order to keep all of it. So if you don't, you have to spend 10% by 6 months, 45 by 12, 75 by 18, or 20, all of it by 24 months. But if you end up having to not meet those spin downs, it's not the worst thing in the world because it meant you earned every penny of interest the IRS permits you to earn. But I just wanted you to be aware of that, those spin downs. So it might be where you want to pre-buy some of this equipment and have that, just get it and have the equipment hit that first threshold of 10%. Those are strategies that, you can work with the architect and with us to try to achieve those objectives.
All right. Thank you, Bob. All right. Next up under the presentations is another presentation. No, I'm kidding. We have no public comment this evening. And with that, I'll move to the consent agenda. Can I get a motion to approve items D1 through D7?
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions? Hearing none, can you please open the vote?
Voting is open. The votes are unanimous. Motion passes.
All right, next up under action items, we have the presentation of invoices for January 17th, 2025 through February 20th, 2025.
Motion to approve invoices in the amount of $3,948,941.49.
We have a motion, can I get a second?
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Any questions on the invoices? Hearing none, can you please open the vote?
Voting is open. This vote is unanimous. Motion passes.
Next up is the treasurer's report. I'll turn it over to Dr. Dubek.
In January, revenues totaled $4.4 million, expenses $8.7 million, excluding the scheduled bond payment of $25.7. Cash balance on January 31 was $38.9 million. Through January 31, 2025, 50.8% of budgeted operating revenues received, 56.9% of operational spending has occurred. As you can see through this point last year, comparison data were 50% and 57.6. Mr. Janik, it was 0.2% last year. I tried to get it to 0.1. We're trending a little better, so
We're
we're
getting
in
there.
good shape. Yeah, we're in good shape, actually. So,
Always room for improvement.
investment report through January, liquid rates hovered at about 4.3. I believe I mentioned this last month. 3 of our treasury bills matured in January. Average return near 4.7. So those proved to be some good laddering decisions, and we earned about $200,000 in investment revenue just from those 3. I did place a municipal market update from PMA in your packet materials. You have any questions on it, let me know. Cash variance, positive $3.3 million, evening out a couple months of negative compared to historical norms. Mandated categorical payments caught up. And then looking ahead, various department budget work is already underway for fiscal year 26. Hard to believe, but the preliminary budget slated for June. And so our administrative team is going through initial rounds of budgeting now. That's all I have.
Anything in the governor's address that we need to be aware of in terms of?
No, he did mention education and his commitment to maintain funding. So I think absolute worst case scenario, we would see a hold harmless freeze, but everything indicates that he's going to continue to increase the funding formula, which would, where we're at, would help us.
Any other questions? Hearing none, can I get a motion to approve the treasurer's report for January 2025 as presented? We have a motion and a second. Can you please open the vote?
Voting is open. This vote is unanimous. Motion passes.
All right, we have the student activities report for January 2025.
Student activities report for the month ended January 31st. The total activity fund balance was $2,353,420, with revenues of $257,865 and expenditures of $294,833. We had one activity in the negative. It was just due to timing. It was already positive by the end, or will be positive by the end of this month. And then we're asking for 3 new accounts: the Fem Power Club at East, the Muslim Student Association at East, and Powerlifting Club at East. Those three have started clubs and just need an account for fundraising possibilities and pizza and T-shirts and different types of activities.
At first, I thought that said Fern Power.
I did
I'm
too,
like-
the first time I read it. Yeah.
Yeah, then I got the explanation, like, got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I get a motion to approve the student activities report for January 2025 as presented?
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. Can you please open the vote?
Voting is open. The vote is unanimous. Motion passes.
Next up is the adoption of the district brand refresh.
So we would just ask approval for a brand refresh. We have budgeted for different signage, flags, and some changeover here in the next 2 to 3 fiscal years, as we anticipated a change. As Joe said, we just weren't in a place 10 years ago or 7 years ago when we came out of that strategic planning to tackle this. And so I think now's a good time, and it was, Jen did a great job with the process. It wasn't just administrators in a room saying this is what we're going to do, or board members in a room saying this is what we're going to do. Had input from 210 Advisory, had input from student groups. So I think the process was a good process, and we came up with something that I think will represent the district. So I just ask for approval for the brand adoption.
In terms of approving this, once we do approve it, assuming we approve it, when do we start,
So-
getting flags and things like that? I mean,
So the timeline, we would target the start of next school year. It would be August. So over the summer, as you walk around the buildings, we have mission statements hand-painted everywhere. And Mr. Evans hasn't worked for us for quite some time, so we've been tracing around those. We've already worked with Image 360 to develop some signage that we'll put throughout our buildings where our current mission statements are. And so most of the plan then is for most of that to occur over the summer. And then when we come back in August, we would have new flags. We've got new podium designs. And so our target is the start of the 25-26 school year.
will we be auctioning off the old things? I'm serious.
Well-
Someone would want that thing.
Maybe
Someone would
that's
want
something the
that.
foundation could do. Yeah, maybe the foundation could do. There we go. Perfect. So that'll be a next year foundation auction item. We have several of them.
And, yeah.
we got 'em.
No. Will we be budgeting then in the next year's budget for the?
We have. So when we
No
develop-
offense, I don't see a cost here, is what I'm trying to get at.
Oh, yeah, no. So the budget we spent on the company this year
Yeah.
has been rolled forward then for our brand refresh into our PR budget for next year. So we kept that line item the same, which will be enough to cover our flags and some of the signage. And of course, the principals don't know it yet, but in the individual buildings, some of that will be coming out of their budget as well. But yes, we will have it all
They're all
covered.
shaking their heads. No, it's not.
They're like, oh, yeah, okay. But yes, we have a plan for it, yes. Good question.
All right, any other questions? All right, hearing none, can I get a motion to approve the adoption of the district brand refresh as presented?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Can you please open the vote?
New swag, Scott.
Voting is open.
Gotta get some more mediums.
This vote is unanimous. Motion passes.
All right, next up is the UPS battery backup replacement proposals.
Cheryl.
As detailed in your memo for this evening, tonight's proposal is for the replacement of batteries in our existing UPS units and the purchase of a few additional UPS units. In April of 2020, the board approved the purchase of backup power units for $229,000 for the district. We applied for and received an E-rate discount for this of $79,000, making the cost $149,519. In the event of a power outage in one of our buildings, these devices keep our switches and network infrastructure online to support phones and other critical services in the buildings. While the units themselves are still functional, the batteries in these units are nearing the end of their usable life and need to be replaced. To maximize our previous hardware investment, the district submitted a request for proposals in January through the federal E-rate process for the replacement of the batteries in the UPS units that we purchased in 2020 and a few additional UPS units. We received 4 responses back to our E-rate proposal: Coquina Labs, Citronet, CDW, and Questivity. The Citronet proposal was non-responsive to the RFP. Essentially, they didn't answer what we were asking for. The other 3 vendors provided a hardware list as requested, but both the Coquina and Questivity proposals were received after the bid deadline. CDW provided the lowest cost proposal, as detailed in your memo. The costs for each of those are listed, and has a proven track record with the district. The district recommends the approval of the CDW proposal as presented for $42,562.58. We are anticipating a 40% reimbursement through E-rate for $17,025, with a final cost of $25,537.55, as shown on the memo. The cost for this project is included in the 5-year technology budget plan that Mike and I have worked on. Any questions?
Any questions on the proposal? Nope. All right, hearing none, can I get a motion to approve the UPS battery backup replacements?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Can you please open the vote? Thanks, Cheryl.
Voting is open.
Who are we waiting on? Joe?
It was behind,
Yeah, I kept,
it was hiding
Okay.
behind the window, sorry, guys.
This vote is unanimous, motion passes.
that was a close one. All right, next up is the residency verification.
May I refer you to a backup memo in your backup materials. Regardless of what you may hear on social media, we do check residency, and we do not allow non-residents to go to school here. So currently, we're using we use a website called Accurate. We pay a subscription to check those, and then also we use a company called National Investigations. Several districts in the state have begun to go to this company called Clear. Mike, Amy, Fury, and I sat in a meeting with Clear to see what they could do for us and see what they're doing for other districts. 157C just went to them this year. For the same price of what we're spending, Clear will run an entire batch of all students twice a year for us. So we would run one in March or April, let's say, of incoming freshmen through current juniors. And then we would run another one probably end of August, beginning of September, once everybody's here again. And it's really neat the way they set it up. You get it back if green, which is well over 90%, that's good. That means there's a direct match in what address they gave us and all the clearinghouses. If it's yellow, we might have entered, Cleveland Drive instead of Cleveland Avenue. There's some discrepancy, but you can look what it is. If there's red, there's not a connection with that address. And then we're able to utilize those databases to determine where the person lives, who's paying the tax bill. It really is a 21st, 22nd century type thing. Mike, anything to add to that? The total cost is about $20,000 to $22,000 a year. That's what we've been spending. Keep in mind, one student is what, $14,000 this year? 14 is
Higher,
a little
15.
higher than that. So, obviously, if we have 2 students that are trying to go that shouldn't be, it pays for itself. And as we've talked with the board, we have to know, we need people to know we're vigilant, because this is a place people want to come, and we want to protect our taxpayers. Mike, anything I'm missing on this?
No, sir.
Okay, so I would ask approval. I wanted to bring it to the board for approval. Number 1, to identify that we're utilizing an outside service, and then number 2, obviously for the expenditure component, and then our plan would be to run our first one here with Clear in March, and start to work through that prior to enrollment for the 25-26 school year. Any questions?
Does this help us if we get into residency thing with sports like we did 2 years ago?
Big
I mean,
time.
Big time. So
Big
it
time.
kind of gives us,
'Cause
hey,
what-
we did everything we could do.
Absolutely, and what we'll do, and what, you're exactly right, Rich, and what we will do prior to seasons, if there's some questions, because we buy the license, we have 5 licenses. I can sit down and I can enter every single football player in the entire district and get a printout, and then they can all be green. And so then if the IHSA or the conference or anybody has a question, we simply print that out. It's not us doing it. This is a database and hand it right over to them. So to answer your question, yes, this takes away some of that accusation and some of the speculation.
Even if somebody tricked the system, it wouldn't cost us a season or a game. It would give us I don't want to say a pass, but it would give us that we did our due
We
diligence.
did our due diligence,
So,
absolutely.
I mean, a couple of years ago, we almost
Yes.
had to give up a game.
Yes.
Right.
So we're not just limited to those two, those are the automatic runs that you have, but you can use it at any time you want to use it, correct?
Exactly, Deidre. So those are the batch runs where they take the names right from Skyward and do a batch run. And then the other ones, all the one-offs, we can do searches ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of the best factors in my previous world, being the person that was responsible for homeless and unhoused people, I think one of the things that was important was that it checks multiple sources. It's not a singular, ID or some one water bill or something along those lines.
Yeah, it's not just the DMV.
It's taking from a entire pool of all the access that Clear has, and
Yeah.
it's a multitude of things. So it's just so nice to be able to do that all at once without the cost of someone here having to track and trace back all of those different
This
sources.
will take the onus off of our assistant principals, and then the reason we have Dr. Feary involved as well, she is our McKinney-Vento liaison, to your point exactly. If we're transporting a kid from Elgin here every day, we need to have that data, should we be doing this? And so that does play a factor in this as well.
It's interesting, Thomson Reuters is actually the company that actually has West Publishing, which collects tons of data already for in the law field. So this is just an extension of that, so.
Any other questions? If there are none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the 3-year Clear software agreement with Thomson Reuters as presented. We have a motion and a second. Can you please open the vote?
Voting is open. The vote is unanimous. Motion passes.
All right, next up is the second reading for the 2025-2026 school calendar.
We're ready to go on the school calendar. We've included early release days and school improvement days. And I will have an MOU for the board to approve the next month. It's already, it just wasn't ready for our deadline for the board packet, but it will be brought to the board next month. But we wanted to go ahead and get the calendar approved. No significant changes. I think the only one we moved an institute in October to the 10th. We originally had it on the 17th. We didn't, that way we can do a 4-day weekend for the students, October 10th, 11th, 12th, and 13th. Other than that, nothing's been changed.
And we've shared this with the association.
We've shared it with the association several times. We've shared this with our feeder districts as well. Everyone's in agreement that this would work.
Okay. All right. Any other questions on the calendar? Hearing none, can I get a motion to approve the 2025-2026 school calendar as presented?
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. Can you please open the vote?
Voting is open. Vote is unanimous. Motion passes.
All right, next up is the second reading policies.
This is an update from press. That's obviously our quarterly update. There's really nothing that will change what we do. Most of these are just updates to footnotes, notations. If you have any questions on anything particular, we'd be happy to answer, but this was basically just a legal update for every quarter.
Any questions on the policies? Hearing none, can I get a motion to approve the updated policies as presented?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Can you please open the vote?
Voting is open. This vote is unanimous. Motion passes.
All right, next up is the Transportation Services Intergovernmental Agreement.
Presented first draft last month, Manhattan 114, three-year agreement with them. They have since approved it. As you can see in the attachment here, it has their board signatures on it. Happy to take any additional questions if you have them.
Any questions on the IGA? Hearing none, can I get a motion to approve the Transportation Intergovernmental Agreement as presented? We have a motion and a second. Can you please open the vote?
Voting is open. The vote is unanimous. Motion passes.
All right, next up is the waste and recycling bid.
In your packet materials is a bid tabulation for waste and recycling. It's typically been a three-year contract, and so the last time this was done was spring of '22, so we were due for it. Worked with Chuck. Chuck in his office facilitated it. You can see we had a number of different vendors, Republic being the lowest bidder for all of our sites. They were the lowest bid for four of our 5 sites last time around. And very comparable costs, given that it's 3 years later. They were not significantly more expensive than last time. So you can see the dollar totals there for Republic. Any specific questions? Chuck, anything you want to add?
We talked to Republic about waiving the additional charges that we have received in the past for over tonnage and contamination fees. So they agreed to waive it for the duration of this new contract.
I'm assuming there's no issues with them either, we're happy with them.
No, we haven't had, they've been very good. The only difference from west and central is that the location of those are serviced by one Republic and east is serviced by another. That's why the roll-off price is different. East is on the border of Crestwood, which is far away, but out of the jurisdiction of Joliet. So that's the only difference in the roll-off.
Any further questions? All right, hearing none, can I get a motion to approve the waste and recycling bid as presented?
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. Can you please open the vote?
Voting is open. Vote is unanimous. Motion passes.
Next up is the outbuilding siding and roofing bid.
So context here being that our outbuildings, concession stands, press boxes, dugouts, this is something that's been on our capital improvements list for some time. The structures at Central and West have not improved. I'm sure many of you know that as you come to athletic events at those two schools. Yep. So we went ahead and we went out to bid. We wanted to see where the costs would be. Solicited bids for materials and labor. Bidders were required to submit a base bid for all of the outbuildings at both campuses, but then Chuck was really smart to design several alternate bids for only Central, only West, just the dugouts, just where we could see where the financials would come in and what we might be able to accomplish. We got six bids. Tabulated results are there. The winning bidder, lowest bidder was M&J Construction. Total base bid to do everything was $516,400. And we've done our reference checks. We've made sure that they comply with, all responsive bidder requirements, board policy. And then in terms of a fiscal impact, this is a project where I mentioned the library renovations before, for example. We have some money allocated in this current budget for additional library furniture. Hopefully what we can fit is the remaining library furniture. As we've worked through that, my office and the principals, we've kind of refined that list. They're putting together some pricing now. By the time that furniture comes, we will be into fiscal year '26 before payments are made. And so whereas this was initially slated to be maybe a little bit later, I know that in terms of contractor work, there's an interest in doing it now before they get more hectic. And so the financial proposal, as you can see in the cover memo, is just to swap the projects, and the money's the money is flat budgetarily. So there's no other fiscal impact. Chuck, is there anything you'd like to add in terms of?
No, I think just time is in our favor. They're eager to get started, so it would be something that we could do right away.
Does impact any, seasons this summer? No.
No, Chuck's spoken to the contractor, and they would be able to get here at 5, 6 in the morning as soon as it warms up a little bit, and they know by 3:30 we would have to have access to the fields. They'll have our schedules. We'll be able to work around them. If it warms up just a little bit, I think they're going to go at it pretty hard, because if they can get these done in March, probably, then they're off to their other buildings. These are a little bit easier because most of them are one story except for the press boxes. So they'll move pretty quickly along those dugouts. But it's been over 20 years here at Central.
It's supposed to be 50s next week, maybe. So.
They may be out there if we approve this.
Do you have any concerns with the pricing? It seems like there's a pretty big gap between their anticipated costs and others. I mean, I don't know, it's just.
I think what happened with a lot of them is some of the contractors did their work and some did not.
Okay.
A lot of them, very few of them, came out and actually visited the site and asked questions. And some of them did either a drone measurement or a drone oversee, and, didn't do their diligence. So I
Okay.
think that's why there's a big fluctuation.
And
So
some
did
of
M-
them would contract it out. So
Oh,
some of
it wasn't
these,
even that.
some of these companies were not doing it themselves,
Okay.
but would contract out.
So M&J actually came out? Mm-hmm. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, hearing no further questions, I entertain a motion to approve the outbuilding siding and roofing bid as presented.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Can you please open the vote?
Voting is open. The vote is unanimous. This motion passes.
All right, next up is the informational items, the report of the Lincoln Way Special Education District 843 Governing Board meeting held January 28th, 2025.
So at our 843 meeting, one of the main celebrations was the approval of the fence to be installed around the playground at Pioneer Grove for safety and life safety purposes. That life safety grant was approved by the Illinois State Board of Education, so now the work can begin as soon as possible, as soon as, well, again, weather rating for. So that was just definitely something that was discussed and debated for a period of time, but now is going to be covered through that grant. So some good improvements along with other additional HVAC and some minor adjustments to the building.
Thank you. FOIA requests?
In your backup materials, if you have any questions.
The Buildings and Grounds report.
Also in your backup materials, and thank you to Chuck and his team to keep this updated every month. It's a good resource.
Community Relations report.
There as well.
We then have the District 210 advisory.
This cycle of the advisories that we're reviewing the handbook and exploring any updates. The updates that we're pretty much focused on right now is around AI and the usage and how to manage that with student work, so.
Thank you. And we have the quarterly insurance report.
Attached in your packet materials is Alliant, our benefits broker that we contracted with last year, their first blush at a quarterly insurance report. This does summarize the entire calendar year 2024. Feel free to review in more detail. In summary, high level, we had for the first time in the last 3 calendar years, claims and fixed costs did not exceed premiums. So that's excellent as we've stabilized. So that's good news.
Surplus, right?
Yeah, yep. So that offsets some of those 2 prior years, right?
So where does that surplus go? What do we do with that?
Fund balance.
So what that surplus is in terms of, that remains in our fund balances in terms of budget, right?
Sure.
But remember that that's comparing claims and fixed costs on a calendar year basis also versus our fiscal year basis. So we're across a
6 more
couple of
months.
budgets.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right. So it's a little different tracking it that
Yeah.
way. But anytime we can regain on some of that fund balance we lost with our deficits for medical, as you guys have heard me say ad nauseum, we're stabilizing and getting in a better spot.
Okay.
Medical costs being part of the overall benefits budget, we are trending within like a half percent of pace compared to January 31 last year, fiscal year to fiscal year. So if we happen to have a couple bad months or anything changes financially, I will keep you guys in the loop.
Thank you. Then we have the first reading Board of Education meeting schedule for 2025, 2026.
Yes, as a formality, it's that time of year again. Our last meeting of this current fiscal year is the last Thursday in June, off of last year's calendar. I would propose a start the 3rd week of August, so Rich will make it to that meeting. It'll be the third week in August on the 21st instead of the 2nd, is what we've done in the past. And then it would be the 3rd Thursday of every week all the way through.
Rich, you didn't hear that?
Didn't hear me? It's the third week of August this year, Rich, for you. Yeah.
I made it last year.
I know. Yeah, we all called you. But no, it'd be the third week. It's the start of school, but that's okay. And so I think this is a good calendar. If there's any questions, I'll answer them, but we'll bring it back for formal approval. We don't have to wait for a new board to approve these. So typically, we would bring this in April, and yeah, so
Yeah, let's not.
get ahead of the game a little bit, so.
All right, next up is first reading for registration fees for 25, 26.
Mike, go ahead. You'd put together some work on this.
Yep, in your packet materials, you can see the cover memo as well as the student fees listing for next year and a comparison of 24-25 to 25-26. A year ago, we had increased the yearbook fee by $10 just to offset some growing costs there, but proposing no changes, flat fees for next year.
And then next up is first reading for meal prices for 25, 26.
Same, flat. Student participation has gone up for several years. We are seeing it kind of flatten out a little bit this year, but in my work with Kristen in the food service department, we're good, we're stable, so we'll keep it flat for this year.
As long as eggs come back down, right?
That's right.
No, I'm just kidding. All right, next up is first reading for audit services proposal. Keith, folks.
Kelly and I have worked with our audit firm, WRDR. As you know, Katie Napier comes and presents the audit every year. Our 3-year engagement with them is up, and so we've worked with them. Here's a proposal, first reading, obviously, for a new 3-year engagement with them. One of the things that I'm particularly sensitive to is best practices in terms of audit firms, and there are pros and cons. We talked more at length about this last time around about switching firms, but one of the things that Katie and her team do a good job with is switching out some of the audit staff of the team to get the fresh looks. And so you get the consistency of a firm that knows our district, knows our operations, knows how our books are, knows Kelly and the team, but then we also have some of those best practices to get good eyes on it. So I did work with them a little bit on the money, and they have agreed to, as you can see here, the amounts for the fiscal year 25, 6, 7 audits would be $32,260 the first year, and then 4% increases after that. So take any questions if you have them.
And you feel like that pricing is pretty similar to other audit firms, or is there, you know, a large
I do,
fluctuation?
if any, I've seen some be higher.
Okay.
And I think Katie and her team have been very fair
Yeah.
to Lincoln Way.
Great, thank you.
When we looked for auditing firms, do we go out for a proposal, or do we just reached out to them and said, hey, it's time to renew, let's get a new contract in place? How did that work?
This time, renewal.
Okay.
And so if we're ever in a position where we feel like that's not working, or we need to go out to a more formal, look at a different firm, that would be more of a formal RFP process.
Okay.
You may recall, this is our, Kelly, is this our second extension with them? And so when we chose them, we did go to RFQ or RFP. I forget which one we did. Wasn't part of that. Yeah.
Probably a request for qualifications.
It was. We had, the previous board had gone through that process. So this would be our second extension. As this one winds up, during the 27, it would probably be time for the board and the finance team at that time to have that discussion.
Yeah.
But I do agree with Mike that every year we do have different accountants come through. Kelly Napier's, Katie has been the lead the last three maybe.
I think two.
Yeah, so Dave was our primary the first probably 4 years, and then Katie the last 2. Yep.
All right, the legislative report.
Nothing to report. The governor had his address, as it was mentioned, and funding should be a flat worst-case scenario. We'll see where that goes. Plenty of talk about the Department of Education. I don't anticipate that changing any federal funding for Lincoln Way. Spoken with several leaders in the state, and some believe that, not only will we get the money, but there may be some less bureaucracy. And so we'll wait and see how that all plays out. But in the short term, I'm not concerned. If they do eliminate the DOE, it would go to a different department. The money would still be there. It would just go directly to the state, and we would be okay with that right now. We have, in terms of the Illinois State Board of Education, solid leadership at this time, and I would be comfortable with that move, with that money coming directly to the state, and then the proportion from there. So, we'll continue to watch that.
All right. Superintendent's district report.
Nothing additional to report this evening.
Other district business?
Nothing at this time.
Any correspondence?
And no correspondence.
Any closed session tonight?
None this evening.
With that, and no other business to attend to, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. We are adjourned. Next meeting is March 20th.